Yeah, gotta aim for the top like, hold up. Yeah, I can never doubt myself, I know better. All of you critics be acting like you know better. Blowing the smoke, but I know when the dust settles that I'm in my element. It's evident that there's levels to the game.
What's happening, people? Welcome back to the Athletes podcast. And today we have a special episode. We're not going to be doing any athlete interview today. Instead, I am joined by the co-founders of A2A, Justin and Reid, and we're going to dig into some hot topics to end the year. It's only right that we talk a little bit recruiting, we talk a little bit about admissions, and obviously the topic that had me not crying, I won't go there, but had me pretty fired up, FSU not being allowed a chance at a national title, even though they deserved it. Full bias on the table. I have been a Florida State fan for my entire life, so obviously I'm going to be on the side that they deserved a chance. But with everything that has been coming out and not being a lot of transparency in the process, it's only right that we draw the parity between the process of the college football playoff and admissions and how things are kind of working right now. For this conversation, Justin will be playing our moderator as he's got a good host of questions that he's going to have Reid and I dig into. Reid, obviously, from the admission standpoint, me from the athletic standpoint as a journalist. So without further ado, Justin, I will let you take it away.
Yeah, no doubt. I think that's also where we start, of just like really the aftermath of Florida State being, left out of that committee vote, and really the impact that's had on the landscape. I know there's obviously a lot of hysteria or a lot of chatter around like who, why, where, what, but let's sort of dive into like the results of what has happened since, and like what the impact that has on college football, college sports, and then as a holistic just is the college experience for some of the people that we're, see on TV or the kids that are coming in. Ryan, if you want to kick in on that, just because you're fandom wise, of like what are you seeing in the community, and then what things are sort of impacting your fandom and your vision of what the whole process is.
Yeah, I mean the aftermath has been pretty crazy, right? Paul Feinbaum, Kirk Herbstreit, they've been getting the brunt of a lot of the blowback, as well as Boo Corrigan, the head of the CFP committee, and rightfully so, right? Like when the committee makes a vote or a determination, there's going to be a lot of questions. And, when you create a 4-team playoff with 5 Power 5 teams, somebody's going to be left out. And fortunate enough for the College Football Playoff Committee, they haven't really had a situation like this where there was in my opinion, a glaring error in the process, right? If you have a 6-team playoff from the beginning, and people aren't clamoring about it because, honestly, going from, and I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but going from 4 to 12 teams next year is a huge jump. I could see if you started with 6, where you have your 5 champions, and then the one team that is the team that really proved it later on in the season. So if you went with that, you would, obviously get your undefeated champions in there, or at least all 4 of those champions, or all 5 of the champions of those divisions. And then you would have a chance to bring in, say a Georgia this year, right? Who didn't win their conference, but ultimately is arguably still the best team in.
They won 38. It won 38 games in a row. Yeah, right.
Exactly. So but I think the aftermath of all of it is what the fans are doing, what the Florida government is doing, what the schools and these collectives with NIL is doing. So starting from the top, I mean, when they're not allowed a chance to play, what happens then is people start looking at the money. And that's what everybody's saying, is follow the money. There's a reason why people say that enough, right? If you follow the money for Florida State, you see that Florida State loses out on a couple $1 million worth of revenue from missing out on the college football playoff. If you continue to follow the money, you see where the interlacing of the SEC and ESPN are, right? The network that carried every single week, the interview of the head of the CFP committee, the entire company that is obviously hosting everything, and then also has the contract with the SEC. So that's where the conspiracy theories that, Kirk Herbstreit and a lot of these other talking heads want to go into. Now, as a journalist, when I hear Herbstreit saying he has no power over this, that, and whatever, I kind of call BS, right? Because as a journalist, we're taught to create context. We're taught to, push a narrative, as people would say, right? Like the storylines are made by the things that you are covering and you're shining a light on. So for weeks and weeks, there's a light being shined on, well, Florida State has had very close wins, even though they found a way to win every week. And even before the injury by Jordan Travis that the CFP kind of rested their hat on, there was already a narrative that I would put Alabama in over Florida State. Alabama deserves a shot. Alabama. So, you start to, like I said, you follow the money in that regard and most people are making that correlation and, going as far as saying, well, Boo Corrigan's brother is the VP of production at ESPN. So there's just it's literally that meme of, the guy with all the strings all over the place and he's got all these theories and everything else. So I don't dig in very much to the conspiracy theories, but sometimes things correlate a little easier, right? When the math is mathing, you're going to have a pretty easy result in that regard. Now, Florida State has responded. Obviously, the coach has responded. He had a response that day saying he was disgusted and everything else by their decision. But then the fans have responded, obviously, rabidly on social platforms, or at least, platforms that are out there. I try and stay away from the fact that calling them social networks, because they're not social. They're publishing platforms is really what they are these days. But they've responded that way. But then they've also responded in dollars and cents. So if you continue to follow the money, you see that the collective with Florida State, the Battle's End, has, I think it's upwards of, maybe it's like 10,000 new members. And there's different subscription levels that are in there. I looked into it. I'm not a member as of right now. Maybe in the future I will be, but there's different levels that you can donate. I think it's like $10, $50, and $100. And since that came out, there's like 10,000 plus new members, because their entire kind of battle cry, no pun intended, is that they're going to build a juggernaut so that they can never be denied again. And with NIL, it kind of allows for that type of verbiage. So if you're going to treat college football like a business, and that's what a lot of people, the Stephen A's and Shannon Sharps, are saying, it's a business decision, then there's no reason why schools, and obviously they already have to a certain extent with NIL, but there's no reason that schools can't dive into that even more, right? It was a business decision to bring in Alabama. It was, and the SEC, it was a business decision to, snub Florida State, even though they were a 13-0 Power 5 conference champion, which the original consensus was when they set this up was to essentially protect those Power 5 conference champions. It wasn't to reward the group of 5 champions like Liberty, whose explanation of them getting a bowl game was they just kept finding a way to win, where Florida State had to have style points in their last game with their third string quarterback, true freshman third string quarterback, making the his first start. So yeah, I probably sound like I'm rah-rah for Florida State right now, because I obviously know a ton about the team and follow the team, but I would make that argument for really anybody. If Alabama comes in as a 13-0 Power 5 champion, but they didn't do it impressively, because let's call a spade, they didn't have a lot of impressive wins over the span of the year. They needed a hope and a prayer to beat Auburn, a 6-6 Auburn team. But everybody wants to rest their hats on, the BC game for Florida State, where they were winning 31-10 before, some late scores made it even closer. That game wasn't gorgeous. There was a lot of parity in sports in general this year. Look at the NFL, the number of starting quarterbacks that are out and the number of games that have been close. There's a ton of parity, and it goes from, top down, NFL to college. So, like I said, I feel like there should be more transparency in the entire thing, because if there's not transparency, then you can rest your hat on a rule such as the one that they used and making sure that was being hammered home in those bylaws, right? Jordan Travis gets hurt. They're already talking about who's available and who's not. They're already pushing that narrative, and that talking point and that headline was already being pushed at that point. So that's kind of how I saw things. And like I said, I would pound the drum for literally anyone, not just the fact that I'm a Florida State fan and I feel like they were left out unjustly.
I mean, I don't think you'd pound the drum for Iowa given our situation with the amount of points we did not score this year. But that's beside the point.
But wins are wins,
matter.
right? Whether you win ugly or you win late. Like I give Bama credit for winning that game against Auburn, even though they won late. But you can't say that for Florida State. That it was a really tough game for them against Clemson. Well, they were at Clemson. It's honestly an unwritten rivalry between Florida State and Clemson, since they've had kind of the reins of the conference for as long as they've had. So that win should be credited. They're on the road. Nobody has won in Death Valley.
Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely.
Right. So like you have to give credits to win. So even if it was Iowa, even though they won dirty, and you always bet the under on Iowa, like let's call it what it is. Like they won. They were 10-2. They earned their right. I mean, the Big Ten championship was probably the week before when Michigan and Ohio State played
100%,
each other.
100%.
But Iowa did what they had to do to get to that championship game and essentially finish number 2 in the conference.
Mm-hmm. The college football playoff situation you're talking about right now, like the 4 teams, this situation reminds me a lot of the BCS days when Boise had their stake as well, where they went 12-0, I believe 12-0, and they got left out of the championship game. Same stuff. Like it's really, we're having sort of a Groundhog Day moment right now. And I bet you in 10 years, we'll have one of those moments with a 12-team playoff where someone gets left out that we think is going to, needs to be in, or got screwed, or whatever the case may be. It's all content. It's all storyline. It's all for a narrative, follow the money, those kind of things. Reed, I want to let you to jump in here is on like the aftermath from a legality standpoint, from like who's mad considering, the Florida government, all those things, those kind of stories, and how that sort of affects potentially Florida State in the future, from not just from an athletic standpoint, but like, let's talk about the non-athletic stuff as well.
Yeah, I think so. If we're getting our biases out there, as a Texas grad, I'm very excited about the college football playoff. I think it's going to be a wonderful semifinal and final. But at the same time, I have a lot of the same concerns, thoughts, feelings as Ryan in this. I mean, it's certainly the term gets thrown around in such a wild way, but it's an unprecedented thing that we've seen in this process. And for me, I think the wildest thing about all of this, and especially for Ryan's sake, I hate that Florida State is sort of the whipping, the scapegoat on this whole thing, but it really brought to light the juxtaposition of like what this college football process looks like and what the admissions process looks like. Like that, from a college counseling perspective, for all of our very, our large community, it like shined a light on what this looks like when we talk about families and talk to kids about what the admissions process is and getting into colleges just in general. And that, now it's in a format that's a lot sexier, for lack of a better term. People can relate to it. People can digest it. People can understand and see it in a context they understand. And now it allows us to sort of translate that over into what that looks like from a sports, or from an admissions standpoint. And so there's a guy called named Rick Clark. He's out in Georgia Tech. He's an admissions officer there, and wrote a really, really good article, in my opinion, that really kind of distills down the core juxtapositions of what this college football playoff piece is and what this admissions piece is, and kind of going down the list of like, you're looking at the same issues and the same problems on both sides. And you can see sort of where that pathway leads on either end of the spectrum. And so he's got kind of 5 main points that he speaks on, and I want to go through them briefly, and then we can obviously expand on any of them we need to. But when you think about these, it applies to what we're talking about on the college football playoff side, and it applies to what we're talking about on the college admissions side with families and everything in between. First of which being admissions, college football playoff, it's a committee of imperfect humans that have made this decision. Mm-hmm. So you have biases that are coming in. You have institutional priorities that are coming in. You have different opinions that are coming in. To Ryan's point, there is a rubric, if you will, but it's not like a MLA high school grading rubric. It's not a math equation. There's not necessarily a one right, one wrong. It allows for some variability based on how folks want to interpret different rules and different standards and the weight of different rules and different standards.
Which, to be fair, we got rid of when we had the BCS. There was a black and white system of how that worked. Now there's conspiracy theories of like fudging the numbers and changing the math on like what qualifies you for that. But like we got away from a binary system to have opinions and a committee that could take in qualitative data. And so that innately happens, obviously, on the mission side, probably for a lot longer. But like we've built this system, correct, to handle qualitative opinions on subject matters.
Well, absolutely. And on both sides of the spectrum, that's, when it works, we love it. And when it doesn't work, we hate it. I mean, that's really what that comes down to. We love nuance, and we love the ability to, in our minds, right wrongs if we don't feel as though the numbers are telling the whole story. But then who gets to decide what that story is? Who gets to decide what that narrative is? Who gets to decide which story is more impactful than the other? And so that's where we fall into that gray area. And exactly to your point, we talk about the, BCS style 1, 2, now we're at 4. Supply and demand is an issue on both sides of the equation. College football playoff, there's 4 slots right now. There's a Power 5 conference. Immediately, you're going to have a problem there. And to your point, as we expand more, there's probably going to be more conversation to have more critique and more thoughts on who should and shouldn't get in. You look at a school like Duke. They've got, X number of slots, 6,500 slots for kids or whatever, and they've got 40,000 applications that come in. Supply and demand is an issue. You cannot tell me confidently that there's only 6,500 kids or only however many kids in that school that are quality Duke applicants, but there's only so many beds and there's only so many slots and there's only so many places that they can give that piece to. So you've got to start making cuts somewhere. And when you really get in the weeds, it depends on the day. It depends on the reader's feelings. It depends on how they connect with an essay or an activity or a phrase or anything in between. And that happens on both sides. On the college football side, on the admission side, context matters and who's reading matters. And there's just not enough slots for people to get in when it really qualifies, which leads into the next piece of stats don't guarantee slots. Right, we saw it as clear as humanly possible on the college football side, 13-0. I mean, you can't really do much more than that. You literally handed a perfect score to the committee and said, obviously we're getting in. And they said, well, these 2 teams that got 1 loss, and so it goes. On the admission side, you have these Ivy Leagues and these crazy highly selective schools and whatnot. You've got kids that are handing them perfect SAT, ACT scores. You have kids that are handing them valedictorian, salutatorian metrics on their applications, and they're looking at these kids and going, that's great, but that's not what we need. So we're going to go get this person over here who fits a particular activity slot or fills a particular major that we feel we're less on right now, and we have somebody who's willing to come here and spend tuition and be a textiles and manufacturing major. We need more of those at this school, and so we're going to focus on that. So you don't know what those institutional priorities are at any given moment on either side. So we've seen it in action now. We see it all the time on the college admission side, and we try to explain it to families, and it's hard to, because how do you tell a kid that, hey, you did all the things right, but you still might not get picked? Now we're seeing it in the limelight, in an example of like, man, what could Florida State have done better other than maybe not have their top quarterback get injured? Like, you can't control that. It's out of your control, and yet it affects your outcome. Mm-hmm. And so we're seeing that juxtaposed.
I want to chime in there too, because you talk about how there's only a limited amount of slots when it comes to admissions. You said at Duke, right? And Duke is power basketball. That's what they are. Everybody knows, you're not, if this was basketball instead of football, you're not leaving Duke out. That would be the argument, right? The argument right now is you're not leaving the SEC out of the football playoff. You're not leaving Duke out. You're not leaving the ACC out of a basketball playoff. That's not happening. But when you look at the amount of slots that are open for admissions, you say you have this many, you have 40,000 kids that are submitting an application, and you have 20,000 slots. You truly have 5,000 slots, because you have to account for the athletes that are coming in, and there's a multitude of sports that are on campus that those coaches are, it's first come, first serve, but those coaches can, sleep in late because they've got, their tickets are pre-ordered, right? Like to get those kids in. So that's kind of the issue, right? Is there's always a bias. There's always a slanted crowd. There's always, the scales are always tipped, and they're rarely tipped in your favor. You come into the season thinking we're going to go 13-0. We're going to win our conference. And after our quarterback goes down, we end up scoring X amount of points, winning this many games with our backup. And you move us from 5 to 4, essentially giving us the green light that we're going to get in, essentially letting us know we're waitlisted if we want to look at it from an admission standpoint. And then we have another win, but we got an A, but not an A plus, and we drop. And it's just like, it doesn't make any sense, right? Like, you move from the wait list to out because the legacy kid came in, and that's the problem, right? In this entire thing, Alabama is the legacy kid that gets in over the kid that probably deserves it, has the perfect ACT scores, had, like you said, isn't going to have to spend money on tuition because, he has the scholarships, or his family has the money. So the money's not a problem, or he's donating whatever. There's some sort of handshake, envelope handshake going on, and he gets in. So I honestly see the correlation pretty easily. And I think that's truly what happened on both angles. There's kids that aren't getting in, and, from on a college football playoff, and there's kids that aren't getting into schools because of that legacy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you hit on two other sort of core pieces of this juxtaposition of money matters and institutional priority matters, right? Money matters, that one speaks for itself, right? If you've got a kid who's going to early decision to a particular school, who's willing to pay full tuition, who is going to, or is coming to the table and bringing funding, has, a research background, or a family that is willing to donate and excited to donate, or a legacy donor who statistically is more likely to continue donating to a school for longer periods of time. Those things matter in admissions, and we can't pretend like they don't. I mean, schools are, whether they're nonprofit, not whatever, we live in a capitalist society. These schools have to they have to keep up with the Joneses. They have to build new buildings. They have to hire new talent. They have to get kids to want to come here, and they have to justify these $50, $60, $70, $80, $90,000 tuition rates. And so money does matter when it comes down to that. And they have to be willing to take some full pay kids to offset these scholarship kids, and vice versa. So that is just one of those realities that we have. And then on the institutional priority side, exactly to your point, if you've got athletes that are going to come in, and schools feel as though if we have a strong basketball team, if we have a strong football team, then we're going to encourage more kids to come to this school, thus increasing our application, thus increasing the academic, selectivity of our school, thus making it more desirable, thus, then there is a benefit and an institutional priority to want to bring those people in. And, a couple perfect examples. One, University of Tennessee, right? Last year they beat Alabama in October. All of a sudden their application rates spike. I think it was like 40% or something like that over the weekend, of kids that decided all of a sudden they want to go to Tennessee because they beat Alabama and they got all this national attention. Well, their admission rate went from 70% to about 40% in one admission cycle because they won a football game. And that impact on the admissions office, and that impact on the potential payout for a school, is unbelievable. The University of Cincinnati, for me, is a really good example on the money side. When they went to the college football playoff a few years ago, their application jumped, I think it was like 11% total over the course of the full admission cycle. But that equated out to a potential payout for the school of about $1.8 billion. So You're trading 80 scholarships or 80 slots in your school for that type of potential payout. And so schools cannot ignore that. That's huge. It's massive. And so again, you may have gotten a better score than this kid who's going to come in, but are you going to have the same impact for the school, and are you going to benefit the school in the same way? Or do they believe that you have the potential to do that? And if not, the tiebreaker is going to lean in direction of the person who's going to benefit the school more. At the end of the day, they're looking out for themselves. At the end of the day, insert whoever you want to, ESPN, the committee, the whoever, they're looking out for themselves. And they're making a decision that they think is going to ultimately benefit them the most in the long run. And that's just the reality of it.
And you see that it's athletics, and we talk about all the time, like in a small, just athletic standpoint of like for revenue sports pay for the rest of the non-revenue sports, right? That's the case across the board for all Division I schools, right? But now you look at it of like Division I sports success, depending on the school, only for revenue or some of the non-revenue sports, that pays for school or organizational support across the board. It doesn't matter. It's not just athletics. It pays for your $1.8 billion one you said for Cincinnati is a perfect example of that. Like, you are paying for the development of the college, university programs, whatever, in different areas of the school because college athletics propped it up. And you're getting better talent. You're getting more competitive. You now have a need to build more buildings. As you said, build more programs, hire more talent to support this new wave of revenue coming in. So it's not just we want to be good at sports. It's like we have to be good at sports to compete now in our conference or for the right admissions or the right talent to come to our school, which innately makes athletics a organizational institution competitive advantage.
Yeah. And overall, I would love to see more transparency, whether it is the admissions process, like as an athlete, and I went to a Division III school, but as an athlete, once I told the coach I was going to Wilkes, I didn't even think about the admissions process, like not for a second. And I mean, I was a 17-year-old kid, so stuff like that was well beyond me at that point. But it wasn't even a thought. Like, okay, well, this is a formality. So, like, Ryan, sign your name here was basically what it was. My mom and dad sign your name here for consent because as a 17-year-old, I couldn't sign anything on my damn self. So that's what it was for me, right? So admissions as a 17-year-old athlete, even a Division III 17-year-old athlete, it doesn't even cross your mind. You talk to the coach, you talk to the people that you need to talk to. They set you up with some sort of admissions process because you're a student athlete, but your impact is heavily weighted on the latter than it is on the student part as a Division I athlete, certainly not as a Division III. Or is there bias as an athlete on any level? Certainly. But when you're looking at how Division I sports are big business, that admissions process, if they can get by it, they're going to get by it. They just are. And I hate to say it that way, but you have kids that go to junior colleges because coaches want them to have they want it to look better when they bring them in. So they're going to junior college to develop and mature most of the time as athletes. Certainly there's an academic portion of it there as well, but they need to develop as athletes too. And, there's a component of it where they're like, we want you to go over here. We want you to learn this because when you come in, you're going to be making an instant impact, and stuff like that also offsets scholarships as well.
Yeah. It's a bit of REID'S story too. Like as far as like you going down to JUCO to like with the intention to bounce right back up, right? Obviously that didn't happen, but like same mentality of like, hey, I'm going to focus on athletics. Whereas, at the end of the day, you weren't a pro guy, right? And so figuring out about 2 years too late of like, hey, let's focus on XYZ as opposed to, just baseball.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know I'm probably harping on this, but now I'm in the weeds on it. So now you guys have to go on this journey with me.
Go for it.
University of Colorado Boulder, in my opinion, is the most perfect prime example of like you're
pun
going to
intended.
see some
Prime example. Pun intended.
Oh yeah, God, I wish I
is.
did it on purpose. Okay, pun intended. You're going to see some stuff happen on that world because of the impact of the football program and because of what that. So let's take them for. So they went 4-8, which by
Correct.
any measure missed a bowl game. They were 2-4 at home. They ended the season on a 6-game losing streak. Only played 6 weeks at home, right? So that's 6 Saturdays. They generated, just by Deion Sanders existing in that space and there being excitement around the football team, they generated over $113 million into the Boulder community, and that's not talking about the direct economic impact of the school itself by simply bringing in that excitement, getting people into that, right? So, and you look at the rankings there, they win their very first game after coming off of 20, they were 2-24 or something the last 2 seasons.
Yeah, they won one game last year. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. They beat TCU, who goes on to no longer be bowl eligible, but we didn't know that at the time because they were national champion runner-ups the year before. Immediately jumped to the 19th slot. You can look at a lot of different things and go, "What? They've done nothing to prove this," but context matters. And they sat on that slot for a couple of weeks. And you think about the sellout crowds that existed at Colorado, and you think about, I promise you look at the application pool this coming year for CU Boulder. And kids that thought they were kids that thought that was their safety school, kids that thought that was their easy in-state school they were going to go to, are going to get a sad reckoning on that because institutional priorities and money matters. They have to now adapt to what this new normal is at Colorado. And yeah, they're probably going to get better. And yeah, it's probably going to lead up to those expectations. But if you looked at, in a vacuum, what they did this year and what type of impact that's going to do, what admissions office, what financial office at a school is not going to give some leeway to a football program or a football kid or anything in between when it comes down to those tiebreaker decisions? And it extends all the way up to when you look at the college football playoff and you think about what they're going to get based on who they're putting in, what's going to benefit them the most, what's going to benefit the whole pie the most, and they're making decisions, in my opinion, with that in mind. I think you have to.
Well, in Colorado, using them as an example, it's not just their demos for athletes or majors. You have to hit your minority demos. You have to hit your community and your cost of living demos. There's certain benchmarks you have to hit that every institution has to hit now. That's hey, we have to check these boxes, right? And if we don't check these boxes, we don't showcase whatever institutional brand we're trying to check. And when you inundate, with a, let's say 50% increase in admissions or 100% increase in admissions, those windows become so tight where, to your point of when you're hey, I am, a low SES person in Colorado and I know I can get scholarship money from CU Boulder. Well, maybe you don't now. Maybe that's not even an option because the pool is just so vast now of I want to go to Colorado Boulder to have this experience. Well, now I'm competing with, 2 to 5x more people to now have that experience based on my demo. Just my demo alone, not just the collection of people, but just who identifies in my category checkbox.
Yeah, and if you think about it, the premier team on that campus is obviously now the football team. Mm-hmm. And that one department, the football team they are one department in Division I. Yep. You go to any campus, there's a football department. I've been to tons of campuses, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, NC State. There's a football department. That's just how it is. Colorado now has that, where last year they're winning one game, things aren't looking very good. No one's even paying any mind to Colorado. You change that to this year where the entire team minus 3 guys were left. Mm-hmm. Right? So you have an influx of brand new athletes coming into the school. You have an exodus of all the athletes you had the year before that were, obviously on the football team. That's what, 80 or so guys. I mean, the entire roster was rebuilt. There was 80 to 90 kids on that team, and 98% of them were not there the year before. So you look at that admissions process where, you have a ton of kids who submit their application to get into Colorado. And then it's hold on, we can't look at the, potential next merit scholar to come out of Colorado. We got to look at the 90 or so 5-star, 3-star athletes that Dion wants to bring in, because that's where the money is.
Yep.
That's what's ultimately going to be this influx of money. It's not going to be that kid that's going to spend his nights in the library or, be going to the lab or anything else like that. It's the kid that they're going to see on College Game Day. It's the kid that they're going to see on ESPN. It's the one that's going to be signing these incredible NIL deals. So while the money is chasing the kids for sure, and the kids are certainly chasing the money now that they can go out and make it, it's the schools that are still sitting pretty saying, we have these kids that are making all this kinds of money and we can offer all this kinds of money in NIL deals, even though the coaches can't have those conversations. If you have a chance, go listen to, Pat McAfee's show. He just had the Matt Rule on his show the other day, and Matt Rule really lays it out of how they can approach this and what they can do. And even that system is completely screwed up. I mean, when you look at any system under the NCAA, it's not good. There's a lack of integrity everywhere, but they have these kids making X amount of dollars in NIL. You now have these kids that are negotiating NIL contracts to stay at their schools. Ultimately, yes, it's a good thing because more kids, your graduation rates are going to go up for sure, because kids are going to be staying a little bit longer. They're going to be paid to stay, but your graduation rates are going to look even better. So it's going to look, better on paper for you. But then, you have a Marvin Harrison Jr. who they're saying is negotiating a $10 to $20 million deal to stay at Ohio State next year. You have a number of quarterbacks that jumped into the portal the minute that it opened about a week ago.
Yep.
And are now on different teams. Duke's quarterback now at Notre Dame. Ohio State's quarterback now somewhere like Florida's quarterback now at Wisconsin. Like, there's all of this movement has been happening, and NIL deals have been a big driving force for why they are happening and how they're going down. It is always going to be a follow the money sort of case when it comes to NIL, when it comes to athletes, even when it comes to admissions. And like you said earlier, Reed, the College Football Playoff Committee just shined a light on how these guys get it. These men and women get in these rooms and they make decisions based on other people's futures without having to truly face any consequence. You have a kid that their dream school is to get into, X whatever, so that they can major in what you're good at. And now they can't do that. The Florida State's dream was to play for a national title. They did everything right. And now that's not going to happen. It's the same thing as the kid trying to get into a school that has all of these dreams to be whatever and go on and do whatever, but they're not going to do that because of this. Overall, it's the systems that are the issues. Yes, we can point to Boo Corrigan. Yes, we can point to the journalists. We can point to ESPN and say, "Oh, ESPN's fault. They were the one propping up this SEC, ESPN kind of merger and what they're doing, and the contract that they have." You can point to all of these things, and they can be scapegoat. They're certainly part of it, but they're not the crux of the issue. The crux of the issue is the process. The crux of the issue is the things that have been put in place that enable decisions like this to be made. That's why when you listen to Boo Corrigan every single week of the last 5 or 6 weeks of the season, he said a lot of nothing. He gave a lot of non-answers because the rules and the regulations that they have prop up their decision to make the ruling that they did, where they can rest their hat on something that has never been done before. They can break precedent at any sort of time because the rules are set up that way. Just like in admissions, the rules are set up for them to occasionally just make up whatever they want to do.
Move the goalposts. We're just moving the goalposts. Yep.
That's what it is.
Yeah, 100%. I want to end here on a couple quick hitters. Some of them left off where we were at here as far as the idea or the bill that's on the floor of the NCAA as far as like the schools being able to provide NIL deals and what that happens to collectives. Reed, I sort of want to kick it to you, and we'll go back and forth on this as far as what do we think of that idea and how does that affect admissions? Because I know we've talked in previous episodes of like when you raise the price that schools pay, they move that right back on to the student body, which is a whole other ballgame.
Yeah, I think anything in the NIL landscape right now, in my opinion, and I wish I would have gone and read that whole bill so I could speak on it a little more detailed, but it's all so blurred. The NCAA is grasping its straws. Schools are grasping its straws. Some schools figured out how to manage this collective better than others. Some schools are leaning into it more than others. And so you're always going to have a group that wants to keep it the way it is because they're doing well, and you always have a group who's going to want to change the rules because they think they could do better in that new landscape. And then you've got, over in the corner of the NCAA trying to just hold on to whatever sort of ghost power they feel they still have and keep themselves from, quite literally dissolving if they get crushed by all the lawsuits that they're dealing with right now. So to me, it is everyone's screaming in their own direction, hoping that whatever ends up at the bottom of the barrel is what they can better utilize or better take advantage of in their recruiting landscape. So this is one. There will probably be another next month. There will probably be another next month, and then we'll keep kicking that can down the road. In my personal opinion, that seems to be the theme.
Ryan, quick on the transfer portal. So we are all in agreement the transfer portal is a good thing because athletes should be able to move and do what they need to do and not be penalized for it. However, I'm curious, based on your background being more of a team sport as opposed to Reed, who's a pitcher, which is a team sport, but it's its own island of like, do you feel like the transfer portal is having some negative impact on like team camaraderie and performance and being much more turning team sports into more an individual sport as opposed to a group of humans going towards one common goal? Or do you feel like the transfer portal is mostly positive in the fact with player movement not having an impact?
I kind of see it both ways.
Okay.
And I know I'm not really picking a poison here, but you look at a team like Florida State, right? And a couple years ago, their top guys were on other teams. I mean, Jordan Travis transferred from Louisville. You have Jared Verse, who transferred from UAlbany. Johnny Wilson, who was at Arizona State. Keon Coleman, who was at Michigan State. Like, you have these guys that left their schools, but they came to one and they turned it into a serious tradition at another, right? So while they may have been making an individual choice, they came together as a team to do what they did. But then you see it in other ways, right? Where, this weekend, DJU is being hosted at Florida State.
Right.
He was at Clemson, got benched at Clemson, went to Oregon State. He had an okay season at Oregon State.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah.
Now he's looking elsewhere. So I like the fact that you can be an individual and make your choice to be where you want to be, but it's also calling into question your reliability, your word, your commitment, right? And,
right.
So like I said, as I love the fact that these kids can make a decision, if there isn't something that is truly working out at one place, then you make the move and you go. I mean, I can change jobs at any time that I want, right? But if I hand my resume over to a possible employer and they're like, well, you were here for 6 months and then you were here for 7 months and then you were only here for 3 months, like, how do we know you're still going to be here when, in December of next year?
Right.
So, having that freedom, as an adult,
it's the Cam Ward thing, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You just never know. You just obviously never know what's truly going to happen. So like I said, I see it working in both ways, because you do have teams that guys are, they are transfers. I mean, what is it? The last 6 or 7 Heisman Trophy winners were transfers outside of 2 guys. So like, yes, going where you feel you can do better for your future, do it. I'm all for it. Make the move if you really need to make the move. But then, you have coaches that are recruiting guys But then you still have to remember they're going to recruit on top of you. And while the recruitment pool used to be a hell of a lot smaller because they were going into the high schools all over the country to get that next wide receiver, that next quarterback, they're now saying, okay, I don't have to go to, these high schools or sit in mom and dad's living room and make my pitch. I can just pick up the phone and call the kid because he has all his information in the portal, and we can see every single thing, how he competed at this level with a different team. Oh, he would work perfectly over here. Come on over here. And then the NIL collectives and things are then basically purchasing your transfer portal entry as well. So there's multiple layers to it. Like I said, I think it's a good thing, but you're always going to have, your downfalls when it comes to it as well.
And the grass is not always greener, right? I think, using the school that I follow as far as like the transfer portal from last year, and the kids that, went to new teams in 23, I think like 3 of the 8 actually saw playing time, right? When they were starters or they were seeing playing time at Iowa. So it is, again, I'm with you on like the transfer portal movement. I just think there needs to be more structure around like, why are you transferring? And like, is the reason you're transferring, are you going to be in a better situation for that reason, right? If you're going for playing time and I'll use Bruce who's a receiver at Iowa last year. He went to Oklahoma State and he had like four snaps, right? And he was a starter at Iowa, right? If he went to Oklahoma State for non-football reasons, awesome, 100% about that. But like if he moved for football and transferred to that school, like maybe that wasn't the best decision because we were very short-sighted in what we're thinking, right? So I think there's a balance of like what we can do there from like a supportive standpoint, but also an education standpoint of like, don't move just to move, right? Move for a reason. Last one.
I want to put one more point on that as well, and it brings me back to the follow the money case of you have a kid that is absolutely electric, like DJU, doing something in a smaller market of Oregon State. He moves to Florida. If he does end up committing to Florida State and goes there, he's in a market that average, I think, almost 4 million viewers every week, right? Oregon State didn't do that. So if you follow the money, him transferring from Oregon State to Florida State, you're looking at ESPN, NBC, CBS saying, okay, the revenue that is generated from this new electric athlete that is coming into this already awesome team is going to be great for us. So follow the money in that regard too, of the transfer portal probably needing those restrictions, but they're probably not going to get them as soon as we want them to.
Right. Agreed. Last quick hitter on this, because we got to talk about it. There's been some like little bit of turmoil in going back to the Florida State issue of like the legal system or the Florida government wanting to get involved in this whole college football playoff situation for us to tie it back. Reid, what are your thoughts on that component as far as like, lawsuits and or threats of that stake on the academic institution or on the college football playoff committee, which is a committee?
I mean, I guess it's good PR maybe for folks that are in the space, but to me you're trying to put statutes on a subjective decision-making process. Like, I don't know, I haven't read the lawsuit, don't know what they're trying to talk about, but at the end of the day, you've got an entity trying to essentially, put a fluid thing into a chicken wire box. Like, it's just, it's a subjective decision-making process. How could you possibly, outside of just being upset that it happened, how are you going to, you weren't in the room. They have these rules that allow them wild variability in making these decisions. It's to me, if you were to juxtapose it on the college admissions side, it is that ultra wealthy family that everyone hears about in the news who goes and tries to get a dean fired or tries to sue a school because their kid didn't get in because they've got all these great grades and they have all these great things, they didn't get picked. There's just not enough rooms at the end, man. Like, it is what it is. And that's, hey, life's tough sometimes. You don't get picked sometimes. Like, you don't have to like it, but option A is to complain and try and bend the rules and make it fit for you. Or option B, whether it be, football or admissions, is You take the opportunity that's available to you and you maximize it and you show everyone what your value is. So Florida State can go and beat the doors off of Georgia and then look at everybody and go, see, would have been really good to put us in. And that's going to make an incredible statement and people are going to remember that. And that's going to then extend into later parts of, in this situation, their seasons and their careers to get more, in my opinion, benefit of the doubt when decisions start being made. On the flip side, as a family or as a kid, you can whine and pout and be upset that happened and try to bend the rules, or you can take what your next best offer is and you can absolutely crush it with your grades and you can get involved and you can send yourself into a life trajectory that people are going to really be proud of and want to be involved in. You get to choose what direction you want to go on either one of those things. Nobody here is arguing whether it's fair or not fair. These are subjective processes. What we're arguing is, what are you going to do when you're faced with the reality of your situation? And that's what matters.
100%. Again, I'm going back to the Boise thing, but like Boise beat Oklahoma, and like that. If you didn't know Boise beforehand, you knew Boise after that game, right?
I still watch the Statue of Liberty play,
right,
on YouTube just every so often. Now I'm a Texas fan, so it's also fun to watch for that reason.
Right,
but
100%.
it's iconic. They etched themselves in football history.
Correct. So it's what you make of the situation, whether that be football or life. It's like what you're handed this. Deal this hand of cards. What you do with it is what actually matters. So
to kind of put my stamp on it, we live in a world where power, political points, excuse the alliteration, are currency right now, and that's what it is, right? It's okay. Well, we are the state of Florida. We do everything for a look at me frivolous sort of manner, right? It's about power over people, not actually getting things done. So the Florida State fan in me and the college football fan in me says, yeah, we need more transparency on this committee because, when we expand to 12, while everybody thinks that it can certainly help to expand to 12, it's going to give the power to more slots, right? You're going to see more Big Ten. You're going to see more SEC. You're not going to, you may see one group of 5 school, right? Like that may happen.
We're not changing the process. The process doesn't change. We said there's more supply, but exactly. We're still going to be subjective and we're still going to be taking these opinions and someone's going to be butthurt because they got left out. It's just not going to be, a team that's 13-0. It's going to be a team that's 11-2. So it's certainly going to still happen. People are going to be left out. Teams are going to be left out and upset about it. So while it's a really fun headline to see of the college football committee is getting sued by the Florida government, it's just like this isn't for cheap political points. We don't need those. But on the other hand, if we get some sort of transparency from it, which I doubt will happen. I think it'll be a flavor of the month until we hit mid-January. But let's get some more transparency in all of these processes. Let's clean up these processes, right? Let's not go year after year and just say, well, that happened last year. Let's see what happens again, right? If you're not learning from these situations, then you're not bettering yourself. So 100%.
Stupid way of spending taxpayer dollars, but let's get some transparency into these processes.
I would love for the legal system to focus on things that are actually important as opposed to people's feelings, but that's not how the world works. So with that, we'll button up this episode. Thanks for everybody jumping on with us and going through this. We're hopefully going to do more of these in the spring, bringing you a little bit behind the curtain of how we operate at A2A and all the work that Ryan puts out on the podcast. Until then, have a good one. Happy holidays to everybody. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us, and we'll see you in 24.
Thank you for listening to the Athletes to Athletes podcast. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe button so you don't miss when another episode drops. Again, we appreciate you listening, and we'll see you again next time.